gets in here. There's a lot of legalese, Harry, and I hate, you now have to be a lawyer to figure stuff out. Whether it's the baseball contract, whether it's the coronavirus, and all the stuff that goes in between, opt-outs and all that other stuff, Harry. Whether you could be high and be on Twitch like an NFL player over the weekend did.
Isn't 80% of Twitch's audience high?
Not our audience.
How do we know?
You can tell by how they write. We got a guy on here who's never high. You know why? He's got to be focused. He's got to have a laser focus on the law, on the coronavirus stuff, on contracts, on everything that's now no longer about the games being played, but about the minutia that goes around the games that being played. Not games people play. Let's go to Dan Lust, the official. Dan Lust, Esquire, ladies and gentlemen, at Sports Law Lust, joining us right now to dispense some free legal advice. Dan, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Tony. Thanks for having me on. And Harry, a very happy birthday to you, my friend.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
Man, we should get Harry a gigantic Shaka delicious 66 slice of pepperoni pizza. What do you think, Dan?
It looks pretty good.
It does look good.
Yeah.
I'll broker that deal, guys. Just give me a little, maybe one slice as my commission here.
That or a Popeye's chicken sandwich, because I haven't had one of those
Guess
yet.
where I went Friday night after the show, Robin? We walked over. Robin and I got Popeyes.
And you got another one, and Robin had her first one? Is that?
No, Robin's had one before.
Oh, you did?
This was our, third.
They are very good.
They are. Dan, I know we're talking food here, and you're making me hungry, Robin, so let's get down to the business. I know you're writing a lot of stuff. No, I mean, listen. He's not a typical lawyer always trying to get a piece of the slice of the pie. Dan comes on here pro bono. Right, Dan?
That's true. That's true. I mean, I'll take a piece of Harry's birthday cake, but, there's no money exchange here.
Exactly right. And we love that. Now, will we be sued by the ACLU for having you work for us without any kind of without any kind of fees?
That remains to be seen. I mean, all these offices are shut down with the pandemic, so once business is back in store, you never know.
All right, Dan, we were talking before you came on the show today while we were getting prepared, and you said that there's a lot of stuff to talk about when you talk about law, because we know the contracts, the COVID provisions in all of these sports. We mentioned the MLS now has 668 tested since June 4th, and their positive rate is 2.7. The NBA's positive rate is 5.3. We're seeing now all these governors going crazy because of the spike in the coronavirus. So now from a legal perspective, do you see these sports leagues changing any of the existing language to deal with a possible second wave, so to speak?
Yes and no. I mean, I think the important part, before kind of hysteria takes over and, people are demanding that these leagues cancel the seasons, you kind of have to keep in mind that across the world, we're not having these conversations. There are guys testing positive in the English Premier League, and the league is not shutting down. And, Tony, those numbers that you kind of cited, that's pretty much across the board, just the universal, positive test rate around 5%. So I don't think there's anything unexpected that the leagues have seen at this point. I think that's important to keep in mind. And Adam Silver, recently Woj reported this, that the NBA is expected to withstand, I think they said, a small or otherwise expected number of tests. So from what we've seen thus far, right, I think 16 positive tests out of around 300, that's pretty normal. So nothing's really changed in that sense. The only thing that may have changed, and may have changed the equation somewhat, is this, we'll say, shortage of beds, shortage of supplies in Florida. And that's just the nature of the beast. They picked Florida. Florida's spiking at the wrong time. So just kind of one breadcrumb to leave you with. As they say in the law, guys, what you say can and will be used you again in a court of law. Adam Silver, not so long ago, said that the NBA would not come back until there were sufficient tests in the public sphere. There was full access to public tests. He wanted to be humanitarian, and he was applauded for it. The problem is now when it comes to the NBA, Florida is dealing with a shortage of COVID supplies, right? Shortage of beds. So that's kind of a whole other animal. And the last we heard from Adam Silver this past week is that if they continue to have this many tests, there is a version of the NBA that can get shut down. So, Adam Silver has obviously been getting high grades for all of his handling of COVID, but I think at the end of the day, Adam Silver might say to himself, I'm the humanitarian at the end of the day. Maybe it's not my place to come back in Orlando while these guys are spiking.
Dan Lust joining us now. We got the NFL players are down there. I saw Deshaun Jackson's working out with Jalen Hurts. Tom Brady's out there working out without a mask. And so the rules are not being applied across the board. You got the governor of New Jersey now shutting down outdoor dining for the 4th of July weekend. It seems like these rules, you need a guidebook to figure out wherever you're going what the rules are now. And now there's talk of making it mandatory that everybody wears masks in the entire country again. Not that it was mandatory before. Now you got people saying Trump should have an executive order to have everybody wear masks now.
I mean, the funny thing is, Tony, that no one really cared about social distancing laws when people were protesting in the streets. I think we just forgot about them.
Yep.
And then, and for mind you, for a good cause, we can support that. But it's not really a coincidence that we're seeing spikes around the country in some of these same areas. It can't be a coincidence, right? We have social distancing laws for a reason. And I mean, back not maybe about a week ago at this point, Liverpool, clinched the EPL championship, and the police had to be called on the Liverpool fans because they were in the street partying after hours, obviously no social distancing. So there's no real way to control that. And I think from a legal perspective, guys, it's important to note there's something called federalism in this country. If Trump would have stepped in and made some national policy, the states couldn't have these different versions, different risk tolerance like you see in New York versus Florida versus Philadelphia, Texas. But absent some national policy, we're still going to have this COVID spiking in different states at different times because of, the way that this is being treated. So again, absent some type of national directive, we're still going to see different states lagging behind others. And I think, that maybe there's a competitive advantage that comes of it at the end of the day.
Yeah, in different countries too, Dan. Of course, with baseball, and hockey, you got teams in Toronto that, at least the Blue Jays, wanted to play in their home park in Toronto, and I guess they're going through the legalese of actually making that a reality. What goes into that?
So I know they're looking at Dunedin, Florida, which is their spring training site, and Buffalo is another option where they have their AAA team. So, but, it remains to be seen what's going to happen. I mean, in the NBA, it's just the Toronto Raptors, obviously just the Toronto Blue Jays for baseball, but that's just kind of the nature of the beast. There's still laws to cross the border. You have to quarantine for a certain amount of time. But if you give the Blue Jays, a month to set up shop in Buffalo, Dunedin, Florida, if there's no fans at the end of the day, does it really affect the game?
Right.
And this is what I was kind of mentioning to Tony offline. The part that I'm very curious about as a bettor, as just kind of a sports fan, we've always kind of factored in, right? Like for football, 2.5 points for the home team, or 1.5 runs for the home team. There's no fans, right? So Toronto is going to set up shop in Buffalo or Dunedin, Florida. Does it really affect the line, right? I mean, is it just really a neutral field for everyone if there's no home fans? So I think that's just important to keep in mind. And I think just an interesting note that I'm kind of watching, I and I'm sure like you and a lot of your listeners, placed a lot of futures bets at the beginning and obviously during some of these seasons. We're walking into a landscape that's going to look nothing like when we place these wagers. So as much as you might have liked at one point, right, the Yankees with their loaded lineup, in a 60-game season, it's probably one-third as important to have that much depth. So, important. There's no relief coming from the sports books. They're not so quick to, give up that money so quickly. So it's kind of important to watch. Hold your tickets and hold on to your seat because it's going to be a little wild ride.
Yeah, the 60-game season in baseball especially is a unique animal because it's a lot of times it takes more than 60 games for the cream to rise to the top, so to speak, like it did last year with the Nationals. So you could be getting some teams that you might not think of being in a championship situation.
No, you're right. You play some underdogs here. Again,
Yeah.
60 games, as you mentioned, is not a full season. It's a third of a season.
Right.
So you mentioned that the favorites should win, but they may not. Like the San Francisco Giants, I think it's a lively play here because we know.
Well, you like Gabe Kapler.
Gabe Kapler gets out of the gate. I mean, he finishes strong. It used to be it's not how you start, it's how you finish.
Right.
With Gabe Kapler, it's not how you finish, it's how you start. And that may help a team like the Giants, whom nobody is picking to do anything.
I don't think that's wrong, and I don't think that's the wrong approach. We have so much unknown with so many guys opting out. I mean, even today we had our first 3 opt-outs in Major League Baseball. That's Ryan Zimmerman, that's Joe Ross, and it's Mike Leake. So that's just the tip of the iceberg. And again, this is important to note. I mean, I'm sure you guys hit this, but the Players Association very particularly asked for carve-outs for these players with pregnant wives. They were demanding this, but they actually didn't get it at the end of the day. They got a kind of a version of it, but not full opt-outs as you would if you were a high-risk player. So, again, it's not rocket. The biggest players in baseball have pregnant wives, and we know that the Players Association was really pushing hard for this policy. So my kind of, we'll say, legal advice, gambling advice, don't be so quick to put those futures bets on until we know who's opting out. This landscape could look a lot different. And again, as I'm kind of saying, there's no recourse if your star player drops out. That's kind of just the assumption of the risk when it comes to gambling.
Talking with Dan Lust, Esquire, the official attorney. Now, I know you're spreading out there. I mean, they're not exclusive to the show, Dan. You spread your wings, and you're
he's
now
on a
being
lot of
utilized.
shows.
Everybody has understood the greatness of Dan Lust. So I see him on there. He's on all over the place. The entire country wants this man.
You know what? It started, Tony. You gave me a little bit of a rub, and then I had the rocket ship just shooting off across the country. So listen, I'm loving coming on with you guys. It's always a pleasure. I think one note, guys, I wanted to make sure we got, because I know I've been seeing it online. This Cam Newton contract. Have you guys been hearing any pushback on this? Any type of red flag?
Well, only from the people who think that he should have been paid more than some stiff quarterbacks who signed
Chase
free
Daniel.
agents, like Chase Daniel, other guys. All these guys.
Well, Flacco.
A lot of guys signed contracts at the beginning, and now, of course, the same players who always want the players to go get the most money they can are now upset that Cam Newton's playing for the minimum, but he's got tons of incentives in there. Why? Are you hearing red flags legally?
I am not hearing red flags legally, but maybe you didn't know this about me, Tony. I was briefly at a baseball agency, so I do have some contract negotiation background in addition to my kind of well-versed legal background. I'm going to give you, Tony, just for your listeners, and Harry, we can say this is a birthday present. Ryan Tannehill had a prove-it deal with the Tennessee Titans last year as a 30-year-old, the same age as Cam, and he signed a one-year deal for $2 million, up to $4 million in incentives. Cam's deal, 1 year, $1 million, up to $7.5 million in incentives. So Cam didn't play last year, right? He played 2 games. He's still coming off a major surgery, a Liz Frank injury to his foot. And Tannehill played that last year before the prove-it injury. So before we're, kind of comparing it to Chase Daniel and grouping him in with Jameis Winston, why these guys are getting paid so little, I think Bill Belichick just looked at the most comparable guy in the entire market, Ryan Tannehill, from the year before, and said, you know what, Cam, if you show up, we're going to pay you up to $7.5 million. That's $3.5 million more than Tannehill could have earned. So, again, I think just objectively, I don't think anything weird happened, anything illegal happened. And, guys, remember, this is the same sport where Ricky Williams, a top pick in the draft, signed for a minimum contract with a huge incentive contract. It's nothing illegal. It's all Cam's choice at the end of the day. And you know what? This is some prove-it contract.
Hey, you got to follow Dan on Twitter at SportsLawLust. But, Dan, do you know any more of the specifics of some of the incentives? Like, does he have to, if he reaches an AFC championship game, things like that?
I don't think it's fully reported yet. I think it's basically going to, at least what's out there now, it's based off durability, how many games he actually plays. But, again, it's not really fair to compare him to someone like Joe Flacco, Chase Daniel. Those guys are 33, 34. This is probably the last contract those guys will sign. But Winston, Newton, their values at a we'll say a low. Winston just came up a 30 interception season. You can look at the touchdowns all you want. But Newton played 2 games and is coming off of 2 major surgeries. And one more, just comparison to Tannehill. Cam Newton, major shoulder surgery, and same thing as Tannehill. So at the end of the day, you just got to look at what the market is. They teach you in baseball, football, basketball. You have to look at what the market dictates. And the most comparable guy in the entire market is really Ryan Tannehill. And I'm sure Cam likes to see that as of, what Tannehill ended up signing for this past year.
If anybody has a reason to be angry, it's me. I should be making the $3, $4, $5 million a year that a lot of the big-name guys are.
Right.
Why am I not in that group? Why are people not out protesting and marching in the streets and looting and rioting
for you
on my behalf, since I'm being held back by the man or the woman, whoever's in charge right now? Robin's not holding me back.
I'm probably
Harry's holding
me back.
No, nobody's holding me back. But that's the argument. When I see somebody get a big contract, I don't say, geez, I should be making that much money. And that the athletes, the Richard Shermans of the world, complaining that Cam Newton's getting screwed. This guy went to Stanford. This guy knows how it works. I can't believe he's out there crying about Cam Newton being screwed.
Yeah, it's some prove-it deal, and where else better to prove it than with Bill Belichick, who separately has something to prove. Without Tom Brady in this year, this was supposed to be a rebuild year, all of a sudden they have Cam. So, sports fans, lawyers, I'm just telling you, this is objectively a very valid contract from all things considered. And again, if we were looking at Tannehill, where would you rather have your prove-it deal? In Tennessee, or would you have it with New England and Belichick? So I think a great situation for Cam, and he's got all the incentive in the world to, really show everybody what he has. So, everyone's rooting for him. Makes for a good story.
Exactly. That's what it's all about.
Now, Tony, just so that you know, everybody in the Twitch stream, they're all ready to start rioting for you.
I don't want any person, like if you're going up to somebody's house with a gate, don't break in there and they come out with an AR-15 and a gun like that couple did in St. Louis yesterday. Did you see that? Now they're coming after those people, Dan, legally. Somebody breaks into your property and it's private and there's a gate, and all these people break in to so-called peacefully protest, but they're walking up to your front door where they have an intention of lighting it on fire and breaking it up.
Throwing stuff through your windows.
Yeah, do the people who own the home, who come out with guns, do they have a right to protect their property from an impending potential bad situation?
So this is a great question, and only because I can tie everything back into sports, Tony. That's a blessing and a curse. Remember when Tom Brady, by accident, walked into someone's house in the middle of the night?
Yes.
Remember this from this past?
That was Byron Leftwich's house. It was
his neighbor. Yeah.
I think he tried to go to Leftwich's house, but he walked into the neighbor's house.
Right.
So interesting. Just you throw it in your Google machine. There's something called the castle doctrine. If someone pops onto your property, or God forbid, they pop into your house in the middle of the night, there are certain states, depends where you are, but you have certain rights in your own home, on your own property, that you wouldn't have on public property. So this castle doctrine holds that you can defend your house as if it's a castle, and it gives you a little bit more rights to use certain degrees of force. You can imagine what they would be. So by no means, if people come onto your property and trespass, are they free and clear to do whatever they want? That's what this castle doctrine, the stand your ground laws, all in that same almost same channel.
And that's what's incredible. And now that couple, who, by the way, are lawyers who are representing people who have been victims of police brutality.
Is
so
that
talk
right?
About irony.
Talk about irony, yeah.
So the guy comes out with an AR and his wife comes out who didn't look like she knew how to use a pistol.
No, it's
and they broke
first day with the new gun.
They broke a metal gate at the front of this private entrance, went in there with evil intent. They didn't go in there to protest. Those people weren't the mayor. They're supposedly protesting against the mayor of St. Louis. This is why nothing makes sense. That's why I have to ask lawyers. Those people have a right. They didn't fire any shots. They just told those people to get the hell off their property. That's their right. It was a private drive with a gate that they broke through to go in, and the Washington Post is writing stories calling those people terrorists, for God's sake, saying that those people had a right to break into their private property and go and threaten the house with destruction. A private property. It's insane.
I think we can rest assured that they're not going to be invited to Harry's birthday party tonight.
Well, they can come to my house. The guy brings the AR. I mean, we
got
got problems.
Yeah.
We got problems coming to my house. I want some heavily armed security here, just like our city council and our mayor has. Why can't I have the great security that these politicians have who are running and hiding from people who hate them? Nobody hates me. I don't even need security. I'm my own. I got Harry here. I got Robin. I got Ryan Rothstein. Even Joe C. He's ready to.
We have 3 killer cats.
We have 3 killer cats who will attack on command, Harry.
Hey, Dan, how is the NFL planning for fans in the stands when none of these other leagues are?
I'm very fascinated by this. I mean, the reports this past week that the NFL is trying to limit the amount of fans in the stands, that, they're going to allow 75% capacity, and then there's really a whole host of legal issues as to who gets the tickets and who's not, who's prioritized. That could lead to a separate lawsuit, separate and aside from these ticket lawsuits. But I think kind of just on this political landscape, I mean, you can have your opinions about Trump, about Fauci, but Fauci's been very clear that there should not be a situation where sports return outside of a bubble scenario, and that's what the NFL, Dr. Alan Sills, the chief medical officer, has said that they plan to do. So I kind of alluded to it at the top, but, the obligation in the law for these leagues, these venues, is not to provide the safest possible setting. That's not what the law says. The law says you have to take reasonable measures to provide a safe place to watch a game. So the NBA is, I think the NBA is going above and beyond, which is fantastic, right? They're having these titanium rings, these oximeters, good for the NBA, but it's not the standard that you have to be perfect and do everything and make sure that there are no injuries whatsoever. It's just to be reasonable. So for the NFL, when it comes to fans, when it comes to players, they just have to do what is kind of reasonably safe under the circumstances. And again, guys, across the country, across the world, there are no bubbles, right? There are empty stadiums. There's players playing in stadiums. There are fans in the stadiums. So the NFL is going to have, to try to prove to a jury at some point why they are not doing what their domestic peers are doing. But I still think they have a solid argument. No one has kind of said you actually need a bubble no matter what, because we're seeing, English Premier League, Bundesliga, those guys are playing, right? And there's no lawsuits. There's nothing like that. So I think it's just important to note, just because the NFL might be doing less from a safety procedure than the NBA, might be just a little different, doesn't mean that that's per se liable where the NFL is going to get hit with some monster lawsuit. The NFL has the ability to just say, hey, we're going, to what we need to the reasonable limits of safety and precaution. We're testing every day. Just because we don't have you in a bubble in the middle of Orlando doesn't mean we're not being safe.
And yeah, you're right. The biggest problem with the NFL versus these other sports is not just they're not in a bubble, is that there's like 60, 70 people who have to go home every day to their families and then come back and go to work the next day. And that's probably the biggest concern because, even though the contact tracing thing is one big scam, there's no way they could ever do it because people are refusing to answer their phones when they're getting phone calls. So I don't know how that's going to work, and I don't know how much money we're going to waste with tax dollars to fund that stuff. That's been an absolute boondoggle, and I can't believe they're even trying it in this day and age where people don't want their privacy infringed upon. The great Dan Lust, L-U-S-T, Lust, Esquire. And not one Kendra Lust mentioned in this show, except
right now, yeah.
Dan,
And follow him on at Sports Law Lust. Great follow.
Law
Yes.
Lust. Beautiful, man. Dan, thank
Always
you again.
a pleasure, guys. And
Thanks,
thank
Dan.
you for always clearing up this Kendra issue. I super appreciate it.
There's a lot of new listeners all the time. You never know. I want people to understand. We had a guy named Newton on from Carolina. I don't want to be confused with Cam Newton. It was David Newton.
Right.
So there's that confusion factor, which we try to avoid.
Well, I'll give you an update if anything changes on the Kendra front.
Absolutely. Harry will be locked in. Thank you, Dad. 215-462-TONY is the phone number. Anything